Okay, good evening, everyone, and happy Earth Day. It's a special one, too. Earth Day was started in 1970, so that means it's the 50th anniversary of Earth Day. And I'm honored that you're here and we're all sharing it together. My name is Ileana Betancourt, and I'm a member of Eat for the Earth and will be your host for today's webinar. I'm joined today by fellow Eat for the Earth members, Sabrina Lopez, Dan Stevenson, and Abel Gonzalez, who will be available on the chat and able to provide any support you might need during today's event. Reverend Beth Love is our featured presenter, and I will introduce her momentarily. But before that, I want to make sure we get to a couple housekeeping things. We're expecting a large audience, so today make sure that you put any questions you might have in the Q&A box, which is, I believe it's on the black panel. If not, it's on the white sidebar. And then that will make sure that we can see your questions and that we can bring it to the attention of the presenter as well. Please also get acquainted with the chat box. And it looks like a lot of you already have by letting me know that you can hear, so that's fantastic. And in that chat, you have the option to share just to panelists. You can also share to all panelists and attendees. So let's make sure that your chat bubble is set so that all panelists and attendees can see what you're saying, because we want to make sure that you can see each other's answers also throughout today's event. So let's test that out right now. Make sure that drop down again says it's being sent to everyone, including other attendees, not just the panelists. And then go ahead and in that, why don't you share where you're tuning in from and what your favorite food is? Do something fun and easy, little icebreaker. So I'll do that too. Tuning in from Santa Cruz, my favorite food. I really like strawberries. Okay, so get that going. And it's great to see some familiar names as well. Thanks everyone for being here again. Okay, awesome. Oh, excellent. A lot of locals too. Nice. Sweet potatoes, Brussels sprouts, tacos, mushrooms, salty peanut butter. Tasty. Cool. Thanks everyone for introducing yourself, and keep it going, please. We want to make sure that everyone feels comfortable and sharing today during the webinar. Okay, great. So this is the plan. We're going to do housekeeping. We just did. We can check that off the box. I'm going to give a quick introduction of our featured presenter. She's going to give a presentation, and then we'll have time at the end for questions and answers. So next slide, please. All right. So I'm really excited to introduce you to Reverend Beth Love. She's the author of Taste Like Love book series. She's a speaker, facilitator, teacher, and ordained New Thought minister. Beth has motivated and educated people in diverse contexts, such as nonprofit organizations, schools, churches, businesses, and the California state prison system. Beth has inspired large and small audiences in person and throughout radio and television, from local community TV to the Oprah show. And due to her concern about the contribution of animal agriculture to the climate crisis and other environmental issues, Beth started Eat for the Earth, an organization that partners with institutions to adopt policies and practices that reduce purchasing and service of animal products to sustain a life on Earth. And so with that introduction, it's my pleasure to invite Beth to share her screen and take it away from here. Thanks, Beth.
Thank you so much, Ileana. I really, really appreciate all of the support that you have given for this webinar to happen, and the rest of the team as well. So may I get vulnerable? I feel a little bit nervous right now, and it's interesting because I have spoken to very large audiences and done presentations and been teaching for decades. And I very, very rarely get nervous, but I'm really nervous today. And I'm noticing that I'm nervous, and I know the reason. It's because I care so much about our Earth. I really, really care about it. And I believe that we as a human family can be good stewards of our Earth, and that we can take care of her because she takes such good care of us. And I really care about the children of the world, and I want them to have the opportunity to live long, healthy, sustainable, compassionate, just lives on a planet that supports them and supports them to be able to live in ways that are peaceful and that supports their children after them and their children after them. And I'm so happy about how many people signed up. We had over 150 signups for this webinar, and I wanted to give you so much because I care so much. And so I made way too many slides, and I really don't want to rush through things. I want to be sincere, and I want to make space for interaction. And so I just want you to hold that with me, that that's possible for us to have a really great time together, and for us to get through whatever slides we need to get through, and to learn whatever we need to learn. So I do believe very strongly in the power of intention. Setting an intention is an act that sets something into motion. I don't believe that anything could happen without intention. And unfortunately, many times we walk around with rather unconscious intentions. We find that we're doing things, but we don't really understand why. And somewhere behind the scenes, there's some kind of intention that's driving the behavior. So I'm a fan of bringing those intentions forward into the conscious realm. And Deepak Chopra is one of my favorite spiritual teachers, and he says there's deep intelligence in our awareness that can handle far more than we usually ask it to. Is that powerful? Deep intelligence in our own awareness that can handle more than we usually ask it to. So let's ask big. The stakes are high. Let's ask big. And he goes on to say, at the level of your higher self, intentions are already connected to results, and problems are linked to solutions, and wishes are born with fulfillment in mind. I just think that's so beautiful. So no matter how big the challenges are that we face, and let's face it, we face some big challenges. What's on your fork and the impacts to the earth. There's a lot of challenges I'll share about today, but I think if we hold that at the level of our higher selves, these intentions that we're setting today are already connected to results, and the problems that we have are already linked to solutions. That we can maintain the hopefulness and the empowerment and the possibility consciousness to be able to do what is before us to do. And so I want to take a moment to set intentions, and I'm going to invite you to put your intentions for this webinar into the chat. So it could be something you were hoping to get, or something you were hoping to offer, or something you were hoping to learn. What is your intention for this time together? And just start popping them into the chat. And I'm going to have Ileana read a few of them in a moment, and I'll just add a little bit to my intention. My intention is that each person who came to this call gets something out of it, and also has the opportunity to give something. And it could be a comment in the chat. It could be some support in the chat, or answering a question. It could be making a friendship and making a connection later. But my intention is that everybody gets something, that we leave here feeling more empowered, more hopeful, more full of possibility consciousness for what's before us to do in terms of our beautiful earth, and ensuring that the human presence on the earth is over time more sustainable, more just, more compassionate, and more healthy. And before Ileana reads a few of those, I just want to acknowledge, we're living in really weird times. I read somebody today wrote on Facebook something about the weird times. I just don't want to let a moment go by without acknowledging that some people on this webinar might have experienced losses recently, perhaps related to COVID-19. Perhaps the losses were not related, but because of the sheltering in place, our losses and our traumas are exacerbated right now. And I just want to send out a lot of love and compassion for that, and let everybody know that our thoughts are with the world, even as I personally feel really hopeful, because I see that people are rising up all over the world and changing their behavior drastically for the good of the community, for keeping themselves and their families and the community safe. And so I know more fully than I did before that we can do this thing where it comes to our environment as well, because we have demonstrated it right now with this pandemic. So Ileana, go ahead and read a few of the intentions out of the chat so I can hear them and we can all hear them.
Sure. Okay, so one person's intention is that it's great to connect with like-minded people in this time that we are physically apart. A communication with like-minded individuals and some inspiration for a kinder, gentler society. My hope is that this is the future of humanity. Because I currently eat meat, my intention is to lessen that drastically. Michelle says, open to being open to eat for the earth and my divine body. Let's see. Evil says, my intention for this time is to be present and remain grateful for the collective efforts to put this webinar together and not let our circumstances dictate our desire to be present with Earth Day. Daniela says, my intention is to learn more about the impact my food choices have on the earth so that I can make educated decisions.
Oh, that's so beautiful. Yeah, why don't you do one or two more?
Okay. Learn about how we can be bold, with bold in all caps.
Great, wonderful, thank you. I felt so moved. I actually am near tears. I just feel really grateful. I also feel like something that ministers often feel. I feel like I'm preaching to the choir today. So it sounds like a lot of you are already moving in the right direction, if not already there in terms of your own diets. And I hope that this webinar gives you, more inspiration and more ideas and more information about how you can take it to the next level. So as we know, we have a world in crisis. It's a very tenuous situation. I'm not just talking about COVID-19. We have all of our environmental systems are in disrepair. We're calling it the age of the Anthropocene, which is the time when one species, human beings, have made so much impact on the earth that will be visible forever in the geologic record. And most people are aware that we're in these really challenging times, but fewer people are aware that diet is a primary contributor. And it sounds like we have a lot of people in this webinar that do understand that. And again, I think it's a time that we really need to lift each other up and support each other in maintaining hope, because it is possible. It really is possible that we can face this crisis and we can be victorious as long as we rise together, all of us together. So, what has diet got to do with it? And again, preaching to the choir perhaps, but what are some of the biggest environmental problems we face? Just go ahead and put them in the chat. And Ileana, if you just want to read maybe 3 to 5 of them. What are some of the biggest, problems that humanity is maybe not facing, but maybe should be facing, that are causing problems in terms of the habitability of our beautiful planet. Ileana, you want to read a few of them?
Sure, I'll read them in as they come. Should I say people's names or just the?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Lisa
says habitat loss. Aurora says the fashion industry. May says climate change. Denise says global warming. Karen says climate change, lack of clean water, deforestation.
Yeah.
Leadership.
Leadership, yeah. Yeah, so that's great that somebody put leadership in there, because greed could also be in there, right? And corporate structure of America. There's all sorts of ways that we can think about the biggest environmental problems we face. But in terms of like the actual outpicturing in the world of what our environment is going through, I would say that for almost every single one of the biggest environmental problems we're facing, some of those that were mentioned, like deforestation and climate crisis and pollution of our waterways and air, and so many others that we'll go through in this webinar, diet is one of the top 3, if not the top contributors. And again, we could go back to cause, we can go back to why our diets are driving, and we could talk about who's benefiting at the expense of our earth, at the expense of our health, at the expense of our spiritual integrity. But this webinar is really focused more on the environmental problems rather than the economic and social reasons that they exist. And so in terms of our diets, there's really only one aspect of our diet that is the contributor to all of these environmental problems. And, you probably already knew it's animal products. It's how we source the foods that we eat from animals. And today we're talking about 5 impacts of animal agriculture on the earth. And it's 5 basic areas. We could talk about hundreds of impacts because there really are, but we're going to focus on land, water, wildlife, infectious disease, and climate crisis. Infectious disease because it's timely, even though we can make an argument that it's more of an impact on the beings that live on the earth than it is on the earth herself. So in terms of land, some of the primary issues around land are that animal agriculture uses too much land, it's too inefficient, it leads to hunger, there's deforestation, there's loss of topsoil and erosion, there's many, many more land issues, but we'll start with those. So in terms of how the world's land is used, this is just the land surface. It's all the land surface, whether it's you know, barren or not. It's all of the land surface of the earth. And of that, 27%, the largest chunk, is used by livestock and the feed to the plants to grow livestock feed. So 27%, the largest amount. Forests are 26%. And then the kind of the beige color over there is barren land. And then and that's 19%, 10% glaciers. I'm sorry. Yeah, 10% glaciers, 8% shrubs, 7%, that magenta color, that's the cropland that isn't for feeding the animals. So that's 7% of the globe is growing food to feed directly to humans, whereas 27% is food for livestock and then indirect, you know, using a middle animal to feed the people. And then if you can even see that little purple slice next to that little blue slice, the purple one is the built up area. So the houses and the hospitals and the football fields and the parking lots, et cetera, et cetera. And it's only 1%. And there's also only 1% for fresh water. So, you know, it's livestock's taking up more than its share. But does it matter? Well, it matters because world hunger is growing and we do not have enough earths to feed everybody the way we are, as we are, because, I'm sorry, technical challenge threw me off for a second. So is it a problem? Yes, it's a problem if we want everybody to be able to eat, because those of us in the developed world, Americans and others who eat like us, if everybody in the world ate as we do, it would take 137% of the Earth's entire surface just to grow food for us, because the whole surface of the earth would be covered by our animals and the food to feed them and a little tiny bit to feed people directly. So it does matter because hunger is growing and meat production globally is also sadly growing. Now, if we think about what happens as the population is growing toward 10 billion people, you know, it's a real mess if we don't change, but I believe we can. It's not just about that it uses too much land, but it's also inefficient to take food that is edible by humans, feed it to animals, or to take land surface, grow food to feed to animals, and then to feed to people. So this is a feed conversion ratio chart, and it shows the amount of kilograms of food it takes to produce 1 kilogram of animal product. So for the beef, which is on the top, it takes 25 kilograms of animal feed to produce 1 kilogram of food for human consumption. Now this, like all of the other facts in this chart or in this presentation, there's lots of different numbers. Like the Beef Industry Council, they say that it takes 10 kilograms of food to produce 1 of beef. But there's lots of different ways to figure, and sometimes they're talking about edible, you know, edible food, and sometimes they're just talking about how much the whole cow weighs. So, you know, you have to take these things into account. And I just want to say that I am committed, and Eat for the Earth is committed to using data fairly and to not using hyperbole to try to stretch our case. Our case is good enough as it is. We don't have to look for the worst statistics, and we don't. I tend to use more conservative things if there's a range. And in this case, and in all cases, I source from really good sources like the World Health Organization, the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization, and such, and scientific studies that are peer-reviewed. So if you go down, sheep, it's 15 kilos per kilo of food. Pork, it's much better, it's 6.4. Poultry is the best if you're going to eat meat, and then eggs, and then dairy. Actually, they produce more. They produce a kilo of milk for only 0.7 kilos of feed, and that's probably because milk has a lot of water in it. That's my guess. And then water, of course, there's another issue associated with that. So it's not only the poundage or the weight, but also in terms of protein or in terms of calories, any of these analyses, it's inefficient. So in this case, the chart is kind of going in the opposite direction. The protein efficiency is the percentage of protein that you feed to an animal that actually is usable for human consumption. So in this case, eggs are at the top because eggs produce 25% of the protein that the chickens are fed. So if you give the chickens 100 grams of protein, they're gonna give you 25 grams of protein in the form of eggs. So there's only 75% loss. Whereas down toward the bottom, we have beef. At the bottom, we have beef, which is, it returns 3.9%. I think that's 3.9. It might be 3.8. I don't want to come in really close. Anyway, less than 4% of the protein that you feed to a beef animal is going to be returned in the form of protein for human consumption. So that's considerable loss. Okay, so here's another way you could think about it. You could think about if you had 10.8, now that's the Beef Industry Council's figure. It's very conservative. If you had 10.8 pounds of corn and you fed it to a beef cattle, according to the Beef Industry Council, you'd get a pound of beef. But you could also, with that 10.8 pounds, get 7.5 plus gallons of cooked hominy or 235 tortillas. I would prefer the tortillas. How about you? So the good news is that changing diets reduces land use and all of the associated aspects of the land use. And so this chart is looking at the results of an analysis that was done on a population that was eating the current diet is the diet on the far left. And it's showing how much land is used based on the different types of food in the diet, the meat, the dairy, the eggs, the fish, the vegetables, etc. And that's the current diet. And then the one next to it, to the right, which uses much more land, is the projected diet based on the fact that animal product consumption is growing. So the next to that, you can see the diet that's called the less meat diet. And that's just taking that baseline one, the big tall one. I don't know if you can see my cursor, but if you take that big tall one, the baseline diet, which is the one that happens if we stay on the trajectory we're on, and you just reduce all the different types of meat across the board, you save land. The next one is called dairy beef, and it's where all the beef that is eaten in this diet comes from dairy cows that are spent or culled. They call it culled. And some of the beef is replaced with other types of meats. The one next to it is called vegetarian, but it has some of that same dairy beef in it. So most vegetarians would not consider that vegetarian. And then the one next to that is a climate carnivore. So that's taking the dairy out and the beef out and replacing it with, replacing the beef with other types of meats and replacing the dairy with soy and oil. And then the vegan diet is plants, though it is also derived from the baseline diet in some kind of strange way. So you can see that you can help the environment. Somebody chatted that they want to eat less meat. That's great. You can help the environment by taking an incremental step. You don't have to go all the way. So deforestation is another really serious land issue related to animal agriculture. The largest cause of deforestation, which is on a trajectory to continue increasing if we don't turn it around, is cattle. Largest cause is cattle. And often you see in the press that the second largest is soybeans, and people start blaming the vegans because we eat tofu. But really, most of the soybeans that are grown in rainforest that has been destroyed is grown for animal feed. So this is a quote from Will Tuttle, and we'll return to it later, but Will Tuttle wrote The World Peace Diet, and he talks about this topic of encroachment, and he says, we have stolen the world. and I'll read the rest of the quote later, but he's talking about there's all these free living animals. And if you look at this chart here, this is not going back very far. This is going back, oh, I'm sorry. If you look at this chart, it is going back 100 years, I believe. No, it's going back to 100, the year 100. And it goes up to 2016. And you can see the green is the area devoted to grazing. The red is cropland. And the yellow is at the very, very top is our developed area. And you can see how over time, especially in recent years, we have had an exponential rise in the amount of land that humans are taking up for growing our crops and grazing our animals. So now we're coming to our second area of impact, and that is water. So we've heard about water guzzlers. We often hear about almonds. We'll come to them in a moment. But really, there's lots of water guzzlers. And again, we have inefficiencies in terms of how the water is used and how much is returned. There's water pollution. There's ocean dead zones, just a few of the issues that are associated with water. So I love this chart because it very graphically shows that the animal products are the major water users. The beef, it takes over 1,800 gallons of water to produce a pound of beef. And then you can see the potatoes right next to that, 25 gallons per pound of potatoes. And then the chicken, over 500, the tomatoes, 14, the pork, 717, and so forth. And then there's another slide too, where we can see that again, the only one that is really high up in the air is the animal product, the cheese. And down here on the end, we have walnuts, which are admittedly higher than carrots and tomatoes and potatoes, but they're still, you know, the water use of nut crops is high compared to other plants. But when you compare them to what's really high, you can see that it's not an issue. So yeah, so in case we get, this is one of my things I want to educate about, because a few years ago in California, when the drought got really bad, the press and the social media were pounding on almonds. They were so down on almonds. And yeah, you know, if you want to eat nuts that take less water, more power to you, that's great. But let's not distract from who the real water guzzlers are. So here's an example of a 1/4 pound hamburger. It uses the same amount of water as this 4.5 cups of California grown almonds. And I have known people to slam down 2 or 3 1/4 pound burgers, but I do not know anybody who could sit down at one sitting and eat 4.5 cups of almonds. So the comparison, you know, it's like it doesn't really hold. And, you know, we also know that, you know, soy milk is better for water use than almonds, but almonds are better than milk or cheese or so many other dairy products. So water pollution is another huge issue. Some of you have probably seen these giant manure lagoons that are, this one is associated with a hog farm, but you know, the manure from the waste from animals is huge, and it goes somewhere. Where does it go? It goes into the earth. It especially goes into the water and these ponds that they hold it in, and then they spray it out on the crops. You know, it all makes its way into the waterways, and especially in large quantities if, you know, floods happen or hurricanes, which are associated with the climate crisis, which is exacerbated by animal agriculture. So it's all, there's all these feedback loops. But what's in that manure when it's making its way into the streams? Well, all kinds of stuff that we really don't want in our water, because it's not just in our water, it gets in our food supply, it gets in our bodies. So there's, you know, there's human created chemicals, there's all these awful pathogens, there's excess nutrients, which we'll go to later. And, you know, we just really don't want to be having this in our water. And ultimately, you know, the water is running down to the ocean, and the primary cause of ocean dead zones, these huge areas of the ocean where there's nothing living, the the primary cause is from nutrient runoff. So that's one of those pollutants that is in that manure and that goes downstream. There's nitrogen in the manure, right? There's phosphorus in the manure, but there's also fertilizer. Fertilizer is a huge contributor to ocean dead zones. And the things we're fertilizing, remember, think back to that pie chart of the areas of the earth. Most of the fertilizer is being used on feed crops. So animal agriculture, again, largest cause. Wildlife, you know, there's all these issues related to wildlife and how we share the earth. Biomass, I got very sad. I cried when I read this article that said that since 1970, we have wiped out, that was the Guardian's language, we have wiped out 60% of the wild animal populations. And some of the reasons for that have to do with animal agriculture and its contributions, you know, encroachment, predator eradication, destruction of climate, pollution, etc. So here's the rest of Will's statement. We have stolen the earth from free living animals to use for ourselves and our cows and pigs and chickens and factory farmed fish. And I'm hoping I'm not offending anybody who's here in this webinar who still eats animals. I totally respect you. Eat for the Earth is a movement that is inclusive of people of all dietary persuasions. We don't try to get everybody to go vegan, but we do want everybody to eat in a way that fits within the boundaries of what our Earth can tolerate and still stay habitable. And so, you know, sometimes my language is strong and I feel passionate, and please forgive me. I do include you in your movement, and I'm happy you're here. But just to look at this chart, the top is about 10,000 years ago. The blue is the wild animals, and this little tiny red line right at the bottom on the right in the top chart, that's the people. That's how much room the people took up 10,000 years ago. And then if you look down at the bottom chart, it's reversed. The wild animals, the blue line, is 2% of the population right now today, and then the people and our food animals are 98%. That's of the biomass, right, of the amount of animals on the earth and in the oceans. That's pretty crazy. Habitat loss, again, largest single driver, livestock production. Depletion of fisheries, 90% of the world's wild-caught fisheries fully fished or overfished. The oceans are in peril. We know this. You know, we know that not only are species going endangered or extinct that were once great food species and are probably still being eaten even though they're on the endangered species list, that mammals are being lost as well, that there's bycatch, right? And so the oceans are in peril as well. And I liked this. I like honest science, and this was from, I'm forgetting where this came from, but a very reputable source. And they said that it's very difficult to quantify exactly what causes the loss of biodiversity, except that animal agriculture is likely the leading cause of modern species extinction. And again, because it's driving all of these different environmental systems that lead to loss of habitat, loss of life, loss of diversity, and ultimately loss of species. So I'm going to very quickly go over this section on infectious disease. I'm not an expert by any means, but I highly recommend the book Bird Flu, A Virus of Our Own Hatching by Dr. Michael Greger. He wrote it many years ago. He's coming up with a new book now that will be updated, but it's very illuminating to learn that most of our microbial diseases come from the human animal interface, and primarily through the way humans source food. So, you know, all of these diseases that are listed here originated in animals and now are problems for humans. CDC, Centers for Disease Control, says 3 out of 4 new or emerging diseases come from animals. The World Health Organization says the greatest risk for pandemics is through direct human interaction with animals and animal products. I think that's one of the great possibilities of this moment, is that we can maybe get some of this information out there, and that might help us make some different choices in how we source our foods. The UN Food and Agriculture Organization says livestock health is the weakest link in our global health chain. And it's not, sorry, it's not just wet markets, right? In fact, factory farms create a perfect context for disease incubation because the animals are stressed out from overcrowding, from being given the wrong foods, from not being given the space they need and to be able to do their behaviors. The fact that so many individuals are together that are genetically similar and are massed together in great hordes makes them very vulnerable to viral mutation. In nature, if a duck has influenza, you know, and it dies and it drops into a pond, well, there's not a whole bunch of other ducks near it for those viral pathogens to pop into the next host and to keep mutating more and more. So it doesn't really get out of control in wild duck and goose populations where it originated. But when it gets into a chicken farm with hundreds of thousands of birds, there's just so many possibilities for those microbes to get stronger and stronger and stronger, increase in deadliness, eventually jump the species barrier, and eventually become transmissible human to human. And I just wanted to throw this slide in because it shows that 80% of antibiotics in the United States are used by farm animals and 20% by humans. So here's our largest existential threat, the climate, and we know that animal agriculture is a primary contributor, that it has potent greenhouse gases associated with it that contribute to additional feedback, and it contributes to additional feedback loops, for instance, through loss of soil carbon, through the way farming is done to raise food for animals. And fortunately, the greenhouse gases associated with the animal agriculture, there is some good news in that they're short-lived. So the book Drawdown says if cattle were their own nation, they would be the world's third largest emitter of greenhouse gases. And that's cattle are ruminant animals, and they produce a lot of methane, which is a very potent greenhouse gas. The range of figures that are given from very reputable sources about how much of the total global greenhouse gas emissions are from animal agriculture, it's a very wide range, but regardless of, even if it's at the low end, 14.5%, because they're so potent in their warming potential, 86 times stronger than carbon dioxide, 298 times, 1,000 to 4,000 times stronger, they contribute more to warming than that 14.5 figure would indicate. But the good news is they go out of the atmosphere much more quickly than carbon dioxide. So as we change human diets, we can see a signal in the atmosphere changing a lot faster. We do have to take the carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, and we have to stop emitting it. But if we only do that, and we don't also deal with these other shorter-lived climate forcers, we're not going to make it. So the good news is that if we eat more plants globally, we can reduce greenhouse gas emissions 80% by 2050. This is from Eat Lancet, a prestigious interdisciplinary international commission that was looking at the research question, can we feed a growing world population a healthy diet in a way that's sustainable for the earth? And the answer was yes, but we have to eat more plants. Project Drawdown came up with similar figures. If 50% of the population eats more plants, not all plants, just more plants, we can draw 66 gigatons of carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere by 2050. So there's lots of good news about changing diets, and all of those issues that I talked about, land and water and biodiversity and biomass, and reducing the probability of a worse global pandemic. So, you know, we can do this thing, and we can reap all of the benefits. So here's the point where I'm going to ask what you can do to help. And I have a few suggestions, but start thinking about what your next step is, because in just a couple slides, I'm going to ask you to chat your next step. And I believe everybody in this webinar can do something. Even if you're already doing so much like I am, there's probably something a little tiny bit more that we can all do. And so here are some possibilities. Continuing education. Sabrina's going to put some possibilities for continuing education in the chat if you want to learn more. Dietary shift is something. If you're not already eating all plants, you could make a little shift or a large one. Educating others, advocating for change. Here are some of the continuing education possibilities that Sabrina is putting in the chat right now, I presume. And, you know, there's lots of choices. You can do incremental or major change if you're doing dietary shift. You know, you can choose one of those diet scenarios that was in that graph that I shared. They're all going to be better than eating a standard American diet. Better for the earth, better for your health, better for the animals, better for the cause of a world in which all can eat. Oh, sorry, I also want to say one more thing. This plate on the right, that is actually the Canadian government is recommending that people eat like that. Half the plate, fruits and vegetables, a quarter of the plate, whole grains, and the other quarter, protein foods, including animal products and also including plant products, and make water your drink of choice, not dairy. Enroll your friends and family members, join a meetup or another group, access free programs. Sabrina's going to put a couple in the chat. Learn to make new foods. You have to have support. We cannot make lifestyle changes that are so countercultural without having support. So get your support. And then if you are already all you know, plant eating, completely plant eating, think about if you're ready to take it to the next level, to start educating others, to join an organization, to start an organization, to, you know, talk to decision makers about changes that can be made in policies and practices. And so I'm just going to ask you to put your next step in the chat. And in a moment, I'm going to have Ileana read a couple of those. Actually, if there's some in the chat already, Ileana, why don't you read a few of them, and then I will do my closing slide.
Sounds great, Beth. I'm going to give people a moment to think about their next step and share it. And
Okay.
You know, Beth, we have 2 questions that came through.
Okay.
Do you want to answer them now or later?
Yeah, maybe I could answer a question or 2 now so that we're not in dead space while we're waiting for people to put their next step in the chat.
So Linda asked, how much would we have to, or how much less plants would we have to eat to meet the Lancet projection? Maybe how much less meat? Maybe that's what that means.
To meet the, the Eat Lancet. Okay.
Yeah, Eat Lancet.
Yeah. So what they were talking about was something very similar to that Canadian diet plate that I showed. It was a plant-forward diet. It was not a plant-based diet. It was just really more plant-forward. So I think if I can show that slide again, it was very close there. So, you know, if you look at that slide, it's like mostly plants on that plate. 3/4 of the plate is all plants. And then the final quarter is part plants and part animal products. And so if you ate something like that, and if you're not there yet, you know, move toward that, you know, eat half your plate plants and then the other half part plants and part animal products. You know what I'm saying? So that's kind of like about it's kind of hard to get there's certain things about the Eat Lancet sustainable healthy diet that, I'm sorry, that's not what they call it, but there's certain things about it that may not make sense from a health perspective. Like they use a lot of oil to replace calories, and there's other ways to do that, but it's pretty similar to this plate, which I think is a overall pretty healthy plate for an omnivore.
Great, thanks, Beth, and thank you, Linda, for that question. One more little question, and then I'll read out some of those action steps. I think Pauline was asking if you could mention something about the food cubes.
Oh, yeah.
That's for loan in our area.
Yeah, thank you, Pauline, for that suggestion. Yeah, Pauline Seals is the leader of the Santa Cruz Climate Action Network. I'm glad you're on the call, Pauline. And she found this really great tool that was created by, I believe it was the California Institute for Science. And it is a very interactive, concrete way to understand the different carbon dioxide equivalents that it takes to create a quantity of food. So each of the cubes is of identical size and shape, but they are weighted differently, so that the cube that is the lightest is the one that uses the least carbon dioxide or emits the least carbon dioxide equivalent in production, and the one that's the heaviest emits the most, and then it's, you know, a continuum in between. The one that's the most is the beef. The cubes are about 3 by 3 inches by 3. you can hardly pick up the beef. If you're picking up some of the others first, you're like, oh, that's interesting. Yeah, lettuce, it's almost nothing. And oh, rice, a little bit more. You know, potatoes, oh yeah, kind of a little less than the rice. But then you go to pick up the beef and you can hardly pick it up off the table. It's that heavy. And they're really great for taking out in the world if you're doing some kind of a presentation or going to a festival or something to share with people about some of these important concepts. And the Santa Cruz Climate Action Network and Pauline have been very generous in offering to lend them out. So thank you, Pauline. So what are some of people's next steps?
So next steps are, we have a lot, which is excellent. Don't eat anything that walks on all four, says Heidi. Continue educating myself. Take a plant-based nutrition course from eCornell, says Karen. Amy's going to reach out to the leadership at Stanford Hospital to have more plant-based options in the cafeteria, cafes, and offsite locations. That's awesome. Some people's names are cut off. Someone else is saying, do a better job of making sure most of my vegetables are locally sourced, learning to grow my own food, eating with intention, whether that means becoming a vegan at some point in the future or reducing my meat intake. I'll be more conscious about what I eat and the impact on the earth. I'm going to read some of those great sounding books that are linked to, says Linda. I and a group of friends just formally organized our group Plant-Based Advocates in Los Gatos as a charitable organization, and they're going to do programs to educate people out with the benefits of eating plant-based, encourage others to eat local organic fruits and vegetables, cutting down certain meats like beef. I have incorporated almond milk in my diet, speak to my brothers and sisters about eating more plants. It's a great way to grow community. And how important this is. Yeah, support local organic farmers by purchasing as many veggies and fruits as possible. The list goes on. I don't know if I can get through everyone's right now.
Yeah, thank you so much. I mean, I want to make sure and leave time for more questions if there are, and Sabrina has some announcements, but thank you so much, everybody. I just feel really moved. I mean, this is like the core of Eat for the Earth. It's like mobilize the people, and together we can do great things. We can make some big changes. So I just want to end with this. The Lancet Commission, which is related to Eat Lancet, but broader, and the Lancet Commission said about our response to the climate crisis that it's the greatest global health opportunity of the 21st century. And when we think about this, you know, think about when we, I want to say when, not if, but when we as a global human family rise up and do what is necessary to make sure that we don't hit that 1.5 degrees, go over that 1.5 degrees of warming that's going to put us in runaway global warming and catastrophic climate impacts that will just be in terrible feedback loops. When we rise up to that occasion and when we do what we know we can do when we put our mind to it, think about it. Think about it. The earth is going to be cleaner. The water is going to be cleaner. The air is going to be cleaner. We've seen a little bit of that just with this little pause, this little sacred pause, as one of my spiritual teachers calls coronavirus. We've seen that the earth has tremendous restorative powers, and just imagine how amazing it will be to have all of that happening where we're cleaning up the earth and our diets are healthier, because it's going to take all of those changes. We cannot do this if we don't change our diets. That's clear. And we cannot do this if we don't also change our ways with energy, with fuels. And so that is going to be such an amazing, not only global health opportunity for the people of the world, but also an opportunity for us to become more compassionate, more just, more considerate, and more intentional in how we use and steward our earth. So with that, I just want to say thank you. I appreciate you all joining me as stewards of this earth and taking time today in this amazing 50th anniversary of Earth Week to connect and to learn and to grow. And I just want to encourage you, if you don't know about it, there's some young people in our country who have organized. Tens of thousands of people are organizing online. So be sure and check out, I'll put that in the chat in just a moment, the link to it, because it's slipping my mind, but there's tremendous organization going on and so many amazing things where our young people are rising up and saying, we need to take care of this earth and we need to take care of its people. And that's happening today, tomorrow, and the next day, live streaming. So thank you very much. And I'll turn it over now to Sabrina.
Okay. Hello. I just want to say thank you to Beth for leading that awesome webinar. I hope everyone enjoyed it. And if you did, you should come back on Saturday. So I'm just going to do a couple announcements. If we could hit the next slide, thank you. We have our next webinar on Saturday, April 25th. It's going to be at 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time, 2 p.m. Eastern Time. It is called Good for You and Good for Your Health, How a Sustainable, Healthy Diet Can Make a World of a Difference. We encourage you to come. If you see it on Facebook, because we do have it posted on our Facebook and our Instagram, feel free to share it so that we can get the word out and we can get as many people to join as possible. Similarly to that online situation, we have a What's on Your Plate This Week campaign to celebrate Earth Week and Earth Day, and eating in a way that is sustainable. So we're asking people to join us by making plant-based meals and posting pictures of your meal or you with your meal, and using the hashtag Eat for the Earth 2020 and What's on Your Plate for Earth Week. If you do it on Instagram and you tag us, our handle is at Eat for the Earth 2020. We can repost it on our story or repost it on our actual page if you all were okay with that. So we really encourage you to share your pictures and get in on the fun. A lot of people are cooking right now because people are home and have a little bit more time on their hands, you know? So please join us in that. And then if you're feeling, you know, maybe you're not super confident in your cooking skills, you can join our online cooking classes. So Sunday, April 26th, we have the Hearty Whole Grain Creations class from 3 to 4:30 Pacific time. It's going to be with our lovely Reverend Chef Beth Love and our nutrition consultant, Sandy Rakenmaker. I hope I'm pronouncing your last name correctly, Sandy. I'm sorry. And obviously, donations are always welcome. They benefit Eat for the Earth, so we can keep doing all this cool stuff. The next class is Sensational Salads and Dressings to Cool the Earth. This is going to be on Thursday, April 30th in the evening, so 7 to 8:30 p.m. So this is not this Thursday, but next Thursday, you know. And again, we have on May 3rd, Desserts in the Raw from 1 to 4 p.m. I'm just going to say, I've had like a lot of different types of Beth's food. Maybe I just have a sweet tooth, but the desserts, the raw desserts are just like so absolutely incredible. I highly recommend you come and join that class because like who doesn't like dessert, you know, especially right now. I've been a little bit emotional because of quarantine. So the desserts are just like really beneficial for my emotional being. So I think this will be a great class for us to all join. And lastly, or not lastly, but now we're going to transition into our Q&A, and all of the panelists are going to join, and we'll be able to talk about any questions that people have regarding, you know, what was just in the webinar or for the future webinar or anything we're doing after this. So yeah, thank you all. We could have everyone log on.
Okay. It's time for questions and answers. I'm Dan Stevenson, and thanks, Beth, for the wonderful presentation, and thanks to all of you for showing up. This is really exciting. A lot of great comments in the chat and some good questions indicating the intelligence of our audience. First and foremost, though, a lot of people want to get a record of this webinar, and so it sounds like you'll be able to get that from posting on YouTube and also in your email. So
we'll be following up via email with the YouTube link to the posted webinar. So just stay tuned and pay attention to your email.
Okay. And Jody asks, thanks for the presentation. I'm wondering what you think about how much we can do on an individual level versus how much this is a systemic problem that would need to be addressed on a corporate policy level.
I think that question might be for me. So the way I think about it is that in most movements, we need to reach critical mass before our leaders will take action. The consensus is pretty clear in the literature that we need policy change. We need governments to institute policy change. That is very clear. But we also know that governments don't take action generally unless one of two things happens. We have a very visionary, bold leader who's willing to be unpopular and make decisions that the people don't like because they know it's in everyone's best interest. Or we reach critical mass in terms of the number of people who understand that it's important and start pressuring the elected officials and our leaders. So I think both are really needed. I think we need to do grassroots organizing, and I think we also really need to make changes in the systems. And so that's one of the reasons that Eat for the Earth has been in conversation with the County Board of Supervisors to ask them to take leadership and to ask them to change the purchasing patterns at the county. And that's one of the reasons that we have 2 volunteers who are working at Dominican Hospital to try to make some changes. And we have a volunteer who's been on the wellness committee at the Pajaro Valley Unified School District attempting to make some changes. And so if you're in the Santa Cruz area and you want to help with some of this institutional work, we'd love to have you on board. And if this pandemic goes on forever, maybe Eat for the Earth is going to reconfigure itself as not a local group. But in any case, whatever jurisdiction you're in, I would encourage you, like the plant-based advocates in Los Gatos, they're doing it too. They have been going to their town council and advocating for changes. That kind of change is really essential. So let's do both. Let's talk to our neighbors. Let's talk to our friends, our families. Let's invite people to watch movies. That's a good way to help people understand some of these topics, read books, etc. And then let's also pressure our leaders to make changes.
Okay, thanks, Beth. Denise M. asks, can you speak to wild-caught versus farmed seafood? Which has less environmental impact?
Okay, so this is one of my areas of weakness. I'll admit it. I have not done nearly as much study about those two, the difference between those two in terms of their impact. But I know that they both have really strong impacts. Farmed fish, for instance, they're being fed fish. So you look at the conversion ratio, they're being fed a kind of trash fish, right? But then those fish are dying and are being pulled out of the oceans and out of the ecosystem. The farm fish have a lot of the same problems as factory farmed mammals and birds. There's a lot of antibiotic use. There's a lot of pharmaceuticals. They're living in filthy, overcrowded ponds. Feces, I didn't talk about fecal contamination, but if you're eating meat and you want to keep eating meat, don't study up about fecal contamination because it's in so much of the meat supply, a huge percentage, because there's no way to keep the poop from the animals from not contaminating them through the slaughter process. And with fish, farm fish, they're just like in this sewage sludge. That's what they live in. So it's not a healthy option. It's not a very environmentally sustainable option. I know there are some people who are doing some more sustainable things with fish, putting them in whole permaculture systems. That I know that there's some work that's being done there to maybe do some improvements. The ocean, I'm pulling a blank on his name, but there's this one researcher who really does look at the ocean a lot. And he says, he'll use the word overfishing, and then he'll say, what I call fishing. Because at this point, any fishing is overfishing. We've already depleted the fisheries of the world. We're already seeing species extinction. We're already seeing massive losses of bycatch, turtles, massive, huge, beautiful, magnificent sea turtles, whales, dolphins getting caught in these nets. So there isn't really any sustainable way to fish for fish in the ocean. Maybe people going out and fishing in a little lake if they can find an unpolluted lake or a stream. But even those are really much lower in fish species than they used to be.
Okay, do we have time for one more question?
We are at 6 o'clock, so I'm going to leave that call to Ileana.
I think we can, if you guys are able to stay on a little longer, I think that's okay. It'd be nice to answer people's questions. Otherwise, we can share email addresses so people can follow up, or they can follow up on the email. But for anyone who does have to log off right now, I do want to say again, thank you so much for joining us today and being a part of this webinar. We hope that you enjoyed the time. We know that we did. And if you liked this, we hope you'll join us on Saturday and tell your friends to join as well. So let's go ahead and answer those other questions if that's okay with you.
Yeah, there's just one more question here
Okay.
from Amelia Parker. Hope I got that name right. What are your ideas on honey? I see a lot of people debating on whether eating honey, supporting bee farms is sustainable or not, and was wondering your input.
So again, I haven't researched that deeply, except that I used to keep bees actually before I was a vegan. And so I know a lot about, how apiaries are run and some of the really bad practices that are happening in the vast majority of apiaries. So I would say that in terms of, if people are vegan because they have a spiritual belief or a belief in justice around animals, they probably don't eat honey. But if people are plant-based because they care about health, they might choose to eat honey. And if people are moving toward plants, plant-forward or plant-rich diet or something, and they're mostly concerned about the environment, I would say research that a little bit. But I would think the best bet would be to find some local apiary that you can talk to the people, find out if they're using these terrible miticides on the hives, if they're using pesticides and fungicides, find out if they're stealing all the honey from the bees and letting them overwinter on sugar water, which is in the commercial bee industry. That's what happens. The bees are declining, and they do much better, like all wildlife. They do much better in their own homes that they make themselves in hollows of tree trunks and things like that than they do in a square box that has been designed to be convenient for humans to harvest the honey. But I think you might be able to find, if your primary issue is sustainability, you might be able to find some beekeepers that are using good practices that are good for the earth. And of course, we need our bees. We need our pollinators, and we want to encourage our bees. And there's many, many ways to encourage bees that don't involve taking their honey. Plant native plants in your yard. Make sure there's lots of good flowers in the yard, and don't use pesticides. There's lots of ways that we can encourage. We have so many bees in our yard. We have sage and rosemary, and they're, the flowers, the bees love them. So yeah, I appreciate people caring about the bees and wanting to make sure that they're doing well as part of our ecosystem. Every single part of the ecosystem is really important. That's why biodiversity is so important. Everybody contributes something, and the bees certainly have a beautiful contribution. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Ileana?
There's one more question in the chat from Natalie and Linda. They're wondering, what about eggs and meat from farmers markets coming from small local farms, or eggs coming from the chickens next door?
So it was eggs from next door, and was it meat and eggs from the farmers market?
From small local farms.
From small local farms, yeah. So again, ask them questions about their practices. One of the things that I've learned, and it probably has some exceptions, but by and large, regardless of how the animals are raised or what kind of size farm, they all are going to the same meat processing facilities, also known as slaughterhouses. So, in terms of contamination from fecal matter and, the other types of things that are happening in those environments, even if you're buying from a local farmer, you might need to ask them, are you slaughtering your own animal? Because that might be important to you. Eggs, again, if you're vegan for the animals, or if it's a spiritual belief, you're probably not going to want to eat eggs or meat, no matter how it's produced. The bottom line is that there's no sustainable way to feed the world's population the quantities of animal products that we're eating now. And for us as Americans and others in the developed world to do our part so that everybody can eat, so that everybody can be nourished and so that we can keep living here. As the population grows, we can live within our planetary boundaries, which means the amount of resources that the planet can actually support. We need to cut back. So even if we find ways, like I didn't get the question about, excuse me, regenerative agriculture and rotational grazing, which I often get. And it's like rotational grazing, a lot of people will say, well, that's the answer because it puts more carbon into the soil, you know, and sequestering carbon is really important for addressing the climate crisis. And that's true. So in that way, rotational grazing is going to be better than a type of grazing that isn't giving those kind of considerations and is churning up the soil and releasing a lot of carbon. Okay, so it's better than that in that way, but we don't have the land. Again, back to those early slides, we do not have the land to feed the world's population with animals that are rotationally grazed. By and large, most of the animal products eaten today in the world, 90-some%, are raised in confined animal feeding operations where the animals are crammed into very tiny spaces, hundreds of thousands of them in these huge barns, right? And if we suddenly decide we're going to do rotational grazing and take all those animals out, we don't have enough earths to put them on. So yes, some people could eat that kind of animal and say this is more sustainable. But when I think about sustainability, I think about the whole system. I'm a very holistic person. And if I could eat that way, but the people in Africa can't, the people in India can't, you know, like there's people all over the world who are starving, then I don't feel like I'm doing my part. And it's not truly sustainable in terms of what we really are dealing with, which is one global human family sharing one earth, needing to find a way that we can all coexist with the other living beings on this earth and continue to live long and healthy and sustainable lives. Did that answer the question about the eggs and the chicken well enough?
I'll leave that up to Natalie and Linda to respond to in the chat, but it sounded, yes, we got a yes.
Okay.
Thank you, Beth.
Okay, you're welcome.
I think that wraps it up. So huge thank you again. Thank you, Beth, for such a wonderful presentation. Thank you, Dan, for running the Q&A. Thank you, Sabrina, for sharing the announcements, and all of you for all your support on producing this amazing webinar, Abel as well in the chat and bringing us on Instagram Live. To everyone who joined us and held on to the very end for this bonus Q&A time. Thank you again for sharing your Earth Day with us. Go outside, hug a tree, share something fun with a friend, and stay connected with us online on our Facebook page. We have a worldwide group as well as a Santa Cruz local group, and an Instagram where we will be posting and sharing your tasty plant-based dishes that you're creating and sharing for Earth Week this week. So thanks again and have a wonderful day, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.